Of course, we all know the theories of black conspiracy theories and the suppression of black history. So I wanted to talk about some of the different types of events or conspiracy theories that may have an influence on why African Americans may or may not have self-hatred.
Being dark-skinned and truer to your roots than someone of lighter skin is like you're black, but you're getting treated worse than someone who's closer to your white counterparts. So that makes you feel like I must not be worthy or I'm less than this. And that's obviously going to cause self-hatred because you're feeling like you're less than, you're beneath someone who is farther away from where you come from. And so I feel like that's a huge factor in self-hatred, seeing that play out. And I feel like it's still in effect. Instead of being house slave and field slave, it's just the different occupations, different positions, but it's the same formula.
So you believe that the light skin versus dark skin is still a very big influence in currently today?
The brown paper bag syndrome, I mean, the test. And we look at the 1930s and early 1940, we have Clark and Clark who were psychologists who actually did a doll test to actually test whether or not children were internalizing their own oppression and utilizing that in a form of basically looking at color as a sense of beauty, in a sense, or sense of superiority. So when they looked at the black doll, they recognized it as being something dirty, something ugly, something negative. But when they looked at white dolls, then they saw that as being more beautiful or more accepting. And fast forward in the year 2007, and even prior to that, 1997, there were still studies happening, and there was no change over time. So the oppression was still running rampant and was still being internalized over time through the generations.
We cast spells on ourselves. We have to be very careful about the words that we use to define ourselves, the words that we use to communicate with each other. Because if I say you're black, I'm saying that you're dead, according to Black's Law Dictionary. I say that you're colored. There's no place on the planet called colored, Negro, or anything like that. So I'm calling you anything but your name. Anything outside of your name is the allowance of me disrespecting you,
right,
regardless of what it is. If I call you purple sunflower, that's not your name. So at the point where we accept those terms, we allow someone else to define who we are. At the point where that happens, annihilation is inevitable. And also we have to be careful about what we call the civil rights movement. When we were fighting, well, I wasn't there, but when there were people fighting for those rights or those privileges, they were fighting a race of human rights and not necessarily civil rights, to be considered human as a person, not civil rights. You see what I'm saying?
Right.
So the march was good, the protest was good, that's great. But you have to understand your actual point of assumption from where you exist in the universe.
Black is descriptive, and there's nothing wrong with that in the sense that we understand what we say and when we say that. In the 60s, we defined it, black, as color, consciousness, and color and consciousness. So we called ourselves that. Negro, colored, we understood that was what they called us. But we rose to understand, to define ourselves in the 60s, and we used the term black. It was a galvanizing term. We knew that it didn't describe where we come from. We knew that Africa wasn't called black land. We understood that. It was just descriptive. So it was healthy in that sense.
Okay. Did you want to say one more?
When you say that you knew it wasn't descriptive of where you come from, why settle for that term?
But we still call ourselves African people. We're very
So
clear,
when you say
very clear on that. African people don't necessarily see themselves as being black. I'm clear on that. But our struggle was here in America. And how we define ourselves and how we move, how we communicate is a little different based upon the geographical location of where we are. So it was healthy in the 1960s to go from Negro to black. We was there, I seen the whole student movement. So it wasn't a total description of us, but when we referred to ourselves as that, it wasn't negative.
when you go into courts, that you will run to for your civil rights. You go to your Supreme Courts that house these judges that uphold these contexts. Minority means person of unsound, infant or unsound mind. So when you classify yourself as those things, you are under their jurisdiction. And if you're allowing yourself to seek help from those places, then that means that you fall under all of those things and you leave yourself open to attack from all angles.
Brother Lamumba, I'm gonna let you say the final statement on that.
We understand Africanness, but we also understand that a people can communicate with each other and come with a term. I don't care what the dictionary defines it by. People define themselves in different ways, in different manners all the time. Yes, black was defined as negative in the dictionary. That don't mean that we can be creative with the language and communicate with ourselves as we did in the 60s, and it was a healthy communication. But no, under law, we don't see ourselves as being defined as black. We see ourselves as being defined as African people.
So do you believe that the conspiracies that happened back in time are something that's affecting us currently?
Some of those aren't just conspiracy. Let's
Right.
be very clear. If there's a U.S. patent for HIV and AIDS that is currently on the shelves, patented for the production of HIV, production of AIDS, as well as the cure for AIDS, then there is more to a conspiracy. You have to look into those different things that are being said, because if they are only running rampant within a community, whereas we make up maybe 15% of the population, just for example, and we have 85% of the population within our own selves having HIV and AIDS, then that means that the numbers are skewed and there's something targeted against us specifically. So there's more to a conspiracy. We have to look beyond the word conspiracy and look into the actual fact and historiological.
And Brother Lamumba, I know you said you're from that time, so I wanted to know, what do you feel about as far as the conspiracies are concerned?
And the degree to which you understand that we're at war will determine the degree of your response to it. Our enemy is relentless, and 24 hours a day, every day, they're bringing it at us, and we're losing this war. Something like what happened after the movement of the 60s. They went immediately to the generation that came after the 60s. That's where the drug proliferation was increased. That's where weapons of mass destruction was sold in the community. That's when they began to understand the building of penal institutions, because they had to stifle whatever progression that came out of that movement. So it is a war. It is a war. White world supremacy is not playing with African people. No place on the planet. They're coming at us strong, and we're losing that war.
And Sydney, as a high school student, I wanted to know your input as far as Black history within your school. I mean, is it just about, is it that bad? Wow.
What?
So can you give us a little information about how much Black history you've learned since you're currently a high school student?
Well, every year we learn the same basic information about Martin Luther King Jr. We learn a little bit about Harriet Tubman, maybe. I was a little surprised when I was in 9th grade in my history class. It was like GT history, something, I don't know. And they mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. And that's about it. Like, they don't, I mean, they try to push diversity in the school, but at the same time, they don't really have a habit of embracing culture. So it's like, yeah, we have some Asians, some Blacks, and this and that, but we learn more about the Asians and the Hispanics than we learn about Black people. And then when it's white people telling your history, of course they're going to try to water it down because they know they're guilty, so they're going to try to water it down and whatnot. And so you don't get the full impact. And then there are so many, I love Black history, that's what I'm about. So when I'm talking to my friends, I guess they appreciate hearing that from me because they don't get it anywhere else, but at the same time I'm often hearing, slavery happened so long ago, who cares, we're all equal now, all this and that. Like, if you think you're equal, you need to check again, because it's not. But I mean, I'm just one person. If I could have maybe like 20 more people within the same school spreading the same message, we might make an impact. But I think that it's definitely been washed out of my school. Was it even ever there? Actually, my school was segregated in the 60s, and they had a prom where it was like the underclassmen were slaves on the plantation serving the upperclassmen at their prom. So my school definitely has an interesting history. But yeah, I think it's like that in a lot of schools where Black history is not a factor.
Considering the fact that I attended HBCU and I'm in the history department, we have a great emphasis on the so-called African American experience. So even if you have your military law courses and things like that, you'll still have the Black or so-called Black experience. Is it appreciated? No. We'll have events like this with my organization, 6 people will show up, 4 people will show up. And I have a professor every year who says he teaches the same course at the University of Baltimore, and the whole class is filled. There's a wait list, there's people out the door trying to learn this stuff.
Right.
It's 4 of us in the class at my school.
Wow.
So there's just a disparity between, the value of self, the worth of self, that we have, or the lack thereof.
And Cashmere, I wanted you to wrap it up. I heard you when Sydney was talking, you said something about crossover. Did you say that?
I was saying it was more or less that our history is typically glossed over.
Okay.
We tend to have to take electives in school just to get that Black experience, and it's not, and we only get Black history typically in high schools and junior high and middle schools during Black History Month. So it's not necessarily something that's taught all the time, but during the course of the year, you'll get things like the Holocaust. You'll get things like Roman Empire, and you'll hear things like Troy and so forth, but we don't get to hear our own richness with regard to Kemet and Nubia and so forth, and where we come from, and how life had to evolve from those places and travel from the Nile to these other places, which we now call America, Europe, China, and so forth. We come from a rich place, but we don't get to get that history unless we elect to take the classes.
Right. It's about Black History Month. Does that advance African Americans or does it confine us? So that just makes me think, for Black history, we put it all in one month when Black history is something that, should be celebrated all year. But we're going to come right back to the questions that we have going on.